Welcome. This is MENSCHlife TV, and I'm Doris Epstein. In Canada, these last couple of weeks, there have been some momentous things happening for the Jewish community. A British Columbia newspaper publishes an article calling Zionism a Cancer. A Quebec radio host and mayor of a town in Quebec calls Israel an apartheid regime and a country that doesn't deserve to exist on his French language program. What are we doing about it? We'll be talking with David Koschitzky, chairman of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the official voice of the Canadian Jewish community, and later, an organization that exposes the myth that Jewish women are not abused, and a woman that has been helped. Her story. First, David, welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
This is shocking that people on such level have been attacking Israel. Is this an anti-Israel criticism, quote unquote, or is it the confluence of antisemitism combined? Let me quote what he said. First of all, the person that wrote it is extraordinary credentials. He's a surgeon, and he's based in Washington, chair of both the Washington State Network for Human Rights and the Central Washington Coalition for Social Justice, and a surgeon. And this is for the oldest Indo-Canadian newspaper in Canada, a prestigious newspaper. The headlines read, "Racism, Capitalism, and Zionism are the worst cancers affecting the world." And here's what he said. "The troubles of the world are directly attributable to the triple cancers of racism, capitalism, and Zionism." And it's still on the website of the newspaper. What is CIJA doing about it?
So we took it upon ourselves to monitor the situation and then to express our opinion on it. We've sent letters to the editor asking them to first take the article down and second of all print a retraction. Have
they done it?
Not yet. They feel that anybody is allowed to express their opinion. And our feelings are that there's certain opinions that common sense advise you.
This is the old free speech.
It's
herring,
the old free speech.
Red herring.
But we believe that newspapers have a responsibility. It's similar to, if I'll use a per example, sitting in a movie theater and yelling out fire. You could say that you have free speech, but there's a responsibility that you have where and how you exercise that free speech. And we believe, and you really need to take a look at that article, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism was only part of that article. We believe that any reasonable person reading that article would probably say, this is not the type of article that a respected and long-time journalistic endeavor should be printing. And we're concerned about it.
Is that enough?
Well,
it sounds very polite.
Probably because we try and come across as polite, but we have a very strong team of professionals who are making the proper, sending out the proper messages to a number of places. Listen, if a newspaper really wants to print something that's disgusting, there's little you can do to stop
under
them.
The law.
As we have it, there's little you can do. But what you need to do, and what I think our team has been doing an excellent job of, is making people aware of what's going on, that these type of opinions cannot be simply published without public outcry. And our responsibility is to channel that public outcry.
Which is better than ignoring it.
100%. Sweeping things under the rug was a...
To make nice...
I won't say to make nice, but putting things under the rug and hoping they'll go away, perhaps is the way Jews in France or in Vienna at the turn of the century, the 20th century treated the anti-Semitism there, and we saw what happened. That's not the approach that the organized community of Canada wants to follow.
The other incident, which happened a couple of weeks ago, but is still front page, happened in Quebec. Stéphane Gendron, a TV talk show, and not just that, he's mayor of Huntington, Quebec, a town in Quebec, said, Israel does not deserve to exist. What did your organization do about that?
In that situation, it's not the first time that there's been some questionable comments. We've brought it up, and we were quite vigorous in our in expressing our concerns, and we were happy to see that a number of other news channels brought it up also. Again, it's under review. He's allowed to have his opinion, but it's a dangerous situation. And I think the two cases that you've just brought up here really express, are good examples of a common theme that's occurring, and that is that there used to be two lines. There used to be anti-Semitism, and there used to be criticism of Israel. And people to this day say, well, we can be critical of Israel without stepping over that line of anti-Semitism.
Let's get back to that. That has metamorphosed. Anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, you're saying, has metamorphosed into something else that is hard, perhaps, to detect.
I would say that what's hard to detect is that thin line where you're crossing over from criticism.
Okay, let's go into it in the next segment.
Please.
David Koschitzky, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. David, something sinister is happening. What we see, which is supposed to be criticism against Israel, has changed very imperceptibly. What's happening?
Times have changed, and I'll give a couple examples, if I may. There used to be two different schools of thought. One was criticism of Israel, and one was overt anti-Semitism. Today, they're being blended together, and there's a very thin line today of where you cross the line from being critical of Israel, which is understandable, to where you cross the line to being anti-Semitic. And I'd like to make 2 points on that, if I may. First is that there's an excellent article that was written by Ruth Weiss. She's a professor of Yiddish at Harvard, but she's an expert.
She was at McGill, wasn't she?
Yes. And she just wrote an article on anti-Semitism where she explains historically that anti-Semitism is really a tool that is used by the perpetrators to shift attention from what they're doing and shift attention to a different problem. So that by using anti-Semitism as a tool, the public looks at the anti-Semitic arguments and doesn't pay attention to the perpetrators of those arguments. That's a very keen understanding. And we're seeing that with a lot of the actions of the anti-Zionist people who are crying out for against Zionism and are anti-Zionist, that many times they're doing that to shift attention. Take a look at Syria as a prime example of a country, or Iran. They're trying to shift attention from what they're doing, from what's going on in their backyard, to shift attention to Israel and use a typical scapegoat, which is the Jew. This evolution of attacks on Jewry also caused an evolution in how we handle it. And I'd like to just take a moment, if I may, and explain why we have the Center of Israel and Jewish Affairs.
Which was Canadian Jewish Congress. Why the change?
So, in the years past in Canada, we had a number of organizations. We had the traditional Canadian Jewish Congress. My mother, for example, was the head of that in Ontario region for many years. And if you cut our veins, I think we bleed Canadian Jewish Congress. Its raison d'etre really was human rights and the defense of Jews against anti-Semitism. And it has 90 years of a tremendous history and added so many positive things to the community. We also had a organization called CIJA, the Canada-Israel Committee, whose purpose was to argue and advocate and educate on Israeli issues. Those two organizations together worked with university outreach, which was to help students on the campuses combat some of the challenges that they face for either being Jewish or the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist expressions that were on campus. But as we saw this evolve, as we saw anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism become into one, we said, you know what? It makes good sense to combine these organizations into one. So the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs is a combination of organizations that were there before, the Canadian Jewish Congress, the the Canada-Israel Committee, University Outreach, putting them all together so that we can have one organized approach. Our membership is the organized communities across Canada. So our members or our shareholders are each organized community, whether you're in Halifax, in Hamilton, in Vancouver, in Calgary, where I come from originally, Toronto. Every organized Jewish community has a say in this table, and we represent those organized communities.
People were not happy about the change.
I would say that any evolution, people have reasonable concerns and questions that come up. That's why when we did this, we didn't do this overnight. It was a process that took nearly 2 years, with a number of open and public opportunities for people from across the country to comment on the process and reviews at each stage of where we were going. I think, if I may, one of the best things that came out of this evolution was the fact that beforehand there was a concern about local and national issues and how one would manage the local issue, who would manage the national issue, and how did you have them in sync. And one of the beautiful things about the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs is that it's made up of a national board, but each community, because there are members, has a local partner in it. And that local partner works in conjunction with us to handle local issues. So if I can use a couple examples, here in Toronto, for example, when we had the boycott against Israeli wines, that would be a local issue that is handled by the local partner at this level. It's the local people who handle it, who battle it.
But you have the machinery.
We have the support. We have
the local. Is that how it works?
Exactly. We offer the support that they need and whatever direction they want, but they handle the issue on their own.
Okay, let's take that for an example of how it works today.
Yep.
That boycott of Israeli wines, that people flocked out. It was an email response. It was a grassroots response, which was incredible. And they bought out all the wine.
It was superb.
How did CIJA help that?
So to be fair, when that occurred, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs was
not
not there yet. We were still building it.
Okay,
but we've had
hypothetically.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
what would happen is that would be addressed by the local council. The local council or local partnership has a local council.
And you would help with what?
We have a professional who staffs that. Then there's a number of lay leaders from the local area that participate. The concern would come up, a strategy would be drawn up, and then the local partnership through its local council would enact the strategy.
So there's
and take
more
it to
teeth
action.
in it. There's more.
teeth,
There's more ammunition. There's more
teeth, support, organization, and coordination.
Okay.
All of those aspects.
We'll be back. Hate laws. We're going to deal with this. Is it enough? People are saying whatever they want about Israel, about the Jewish people, and as you say, it's a confluence of both as more lethal because it looks so legitimate. Free speech.
So it's an interesting perspective, and again, I think if there's a common theme of what we've talked about today, it's evolution. Originally, hate laws in Canada, supported by our predecessor, the Canadian Jewish Congress, are part of the Human Rights Board, and any individual can bring a case of up in front of the Human Rights Commission. The Conservative government is thinking of taking that out of the human rights and putting it as part of the criminal code.
Isn't that a good idea? Do you agree with that?
So it's an interesting point of view. We had what some would call a town hall meeting just last week. I would call it a Canadian Jewish Congress, where we brought together a number of Jewish legal minds in the audience to listen to two of the experts on this argue the pro and cons. And one was one of the most successful lawyers who's done more cases under the current with hate law under the human rights, and the other was the representative of the Civil Liberties Union. Our predecessor, Canadian Jewish Congress, feels very strongly that hate laws should stay as part of the human rights. It's been successful up to now, and it should stay there. The counterpoint to that, and one that the conservative government is pushing, and one that makes some sense, is the fact that under the hate laws, any individual can bring it for whatever reason, and can cause somebody to have to defend himself, whether there is a justification or not. What that means is that a law that was supposed to be in place to protect the vulnerable can be used as a tool against the vulnerable. So, as an example, somebody who is criticizing, for example, human rights in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian government could bring against this individual a claim of hate, that he's propagating hate propaganda, and this individual would, at his own cost, have to defend himself. We believe that that may be a little bit out of line, and we're considering the fact that at least if it goes under the criminal court system, then the prosecution of these laws will be the responsibility of the government, who we believe will handle it in a responsible manner. But there's a debate, because up until now, hate law under the Human Rights Commission has been a very valuable tool. And so we're debating. But
it's been abused.
It has.
Ezra Levant made a test case out of it.
Exactly.
Sued the Human Rights Tribunal and won.
It has been abused, and it's that potential for continued abuse that makes us wonder whether there's a better way to do this.
So what do your lawyers, what do your advisors say about putting it under the criminal
as we're sitting
code?
Right now, we had our public Congress, our Jewish Congress, our town hall meeting. We had the two sides present their case. We listened to the audience who was there, who had a vested interest in this, in their perspectives, and we're coming out with our position that we're just molding it right now, and I'll be willing to share it with you as soon as it's ready for publication.
I think this is going to be a criteria for all of the Western world. United States is having the same problem. It's being abused. Under the guise of free speech, you can say anything. And as you put it, you can yell fire in a theater. You can tell people that Jews are the descendants of apes and pigs, and that's okay.
The place that this is really becoming a significant challenge is on our campuses. Our young students going out to campus, many times away from home, are facing uncomfortable situations where, under the guideline of free speech or ability to express oneself, they're fearing sometimes for their identity. They're fearing to be identified as Jews, and if not as serious as that, they're very uncomfortable. And that's an area that we're spending a lot of time working through the local Hillels and other organizations, and making sure that the same tools that I outlined before for the local partners, we're having on the campuses, so that our students can have an organized approach on learning how to deal with this uncomfortable situation.
Are we being paranoid, or are events such as the ones we talked about, and the escalating violence on campuses against Jews in Israel, is it escalating? Is it rising in Canada?
So to answer your question, I think, unfortunately, given our history, Jews can never be accused of being paranoid. I think there may be an accusation of being overly sensitive, but I think the two cases that you brought up that just happened last week, where if you read the article that was written in the Indo paper on the West Coast, or if you listen to what the mayor from Quebec said, I think anybody with sensibility would say that that's not being oversensitive. That's simply standing up for our rights to be recognized.
And with a revision of the code if it's under the criminal code, could those people be fined, sued,
Under the
put in jail?
Under the criminal code, it would be the government's responsibility to review and monitor that. And it does take it out of the individual's hands, but it does put it into a place that, thankfully, we live in a country like Canada where we have respect and expectations from a responsible government to manage these laws properly.
David, let us know what is happening with this. It's very crucial. And come back.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, David Koschitzky, CIJA. Be a mensch. See you next time. To outsiders, they looked like the perfect family. 2 professional parents, a big, beautiful house, 3 lovely children. But open the door, and it was a marriage out of hell for 29 years. Rena, you lived like this for 29 years. Tell us about your life and what happened and how you came to reach out to Penny Krowitz from Act to End Violence Against Women. Let's start at the beginning.
Well, I think the first thing that I will say in my defense for staying for 29 years is that I really never identified abuse. I grew up thinking that an abused woman was someone who had a black eye or had a broken arm. I didn't really recognize abuse. I did know there was something wrong, and I made a lot of excuses for behaviors that were totally unacceptable.
Such as what?
Name calling, manipulation, control of money, bursts of anger, generally just not feeling good inside. My gut was telling me something's wrong.
Had you known him long before you married?
Yes, I did. I went to high school with my ex-husband. We started dating after high school, and there were certain behaviors, there were certain things that just weren't right. But there were a lot of things that seemed right. An educated, intelligent, successful, ambitious, athletic, from a so-called good home.
So-called?
So-called.
Why so-called?
Well, his father was a successful businessman. He was very involved with the community. He did a lot of work for the Jewish community.
Sounds good.
Resume was great. The resume was really good. In actual fact, the day-to-day living was really basically living hell.
In his house? With his father?
Yeah. In retrospect, there were a lot of signs that things were wrong.
But you were married, you were both involved in studying?
When we got married, both of us, I was working and going to school at night, which was part of my program, and my husband was in professional school at the time. So we were very busy. You get very busy studying, working.
And essentially you supported him because you went at night.
That's correct.
And he went full-time.
Correct. Okay. There was a lot of pressure in school, and there were lots of acting out.
Were you beginning to see signs then?
I really did.
Like what?
I mean, if I go back and start looking back, there were signs there. There was one course that he was having very difficulty in, and he was looking for medication Sunday night. He was trying to get Valium or Ativan or something. There was a stress factor that he wasn't able to deal with. There was name calling. He blamed me for him being in professional school, saying that I was making him do this program that he had chosen on his own without my influence. He applied to this program.
Did he blame you for other things too?
There was a lot of blame, and there was a lot of blame. He blamed me for the pressure he was having in school. It was my fault that I wanted him to be a professional, and this was my idea. And
was it?
Really, it was not. It was not. When I started dating him, he had been accepted into his professional program.
So that was
I had nothing to
kind
do
of
with the
pattern.
application.
That was a pattern. That things things were tough, and he felt bad. It was your fault. That was a pattern throughout the years.
That was consistent. It escalated, but I never recognized it as abuse. I would make excuses. He's under a lot of pressure. It's stressful. He's got to get through this program. It's a difficult program. And then we moved cities. We moved our location.
Did you think things would get better when you moved?
I always thought that things, once he finishes school and he doesn't have pressure of school and dealing with his professors and his clinicians, that things were going to get easier. I made excuses for behavior, basically, and I never identified it as abuse. Then we started living our lives, practicing our professional careers. So then you're focusing on buying a house and focusing on having children and focusing. So a lot of the little signs that were there, or the feelings where I wasn't feeling good about our relationship, I just made excuses for it, saying, oh, it's going to get better. It's a new baby. It's an adjustment to our lifestyles, excusing his behavior that should have never been excused. But I didn't at that point reach out for help because I didn't even recognize that there was reason to go out for help.
But things were getting worse.
They escalated, for sure they escalated. It's like abuse is like a cancer. And basically, if it's not identified or taken care of or dealt with, or it just grows, it escalates. So we all have stresses in our lives and they don't go away. Some of them, get bigger or different, but they exist. At one point, I did reach out and said to my ex-husband, we need help. At some point...
What was his response?
You need help. There's nothing wrong. And
There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with you. Is that it?
Yes, basically.
Okay. Hold on. We'll be back in a minute to hear more. So here you are, you're in a new house, in a new city. Both your careers are launched. You've got 3 beautiful children. What are things like at home?
There's a sadness, there's an emptiness, there's a gut feeling that there's something wrong. There were certain incidences that made it very clear to me that this shouldn't be. When I asked my husband to help me in the morning because I want to go sign my child up for a program, and he gets out of bed and smashes the wall and breaks a blood vessel in his elbow and has to run to emergency, I realized, what did I ask him to do? I asked him to watch my son.
Did you feel guilty?
Well, at first I thought, am I being reasonable? Am I asking something that's unreasonable? I wasn't asking him to wake up so I could bathe or relax in the backyard and read a book. I was asking him to watch my son because I was going to sign him up for a program. And the reaction of, even if it wasn't suitable to him, he could say to me, this is a really bad time, or I need to get in the office very early this morning. But the truth of the matter is he wasn't starting work for another 3 hours, and the reaction of smashing a wall and breaking a blood vessel and running to emergency clearly showed me that this behavior there's something wrong with this behavior. I would try to make everything perfect, thinking that if I wouldn't upset him or annoy him, that things would be calm. And at some points it did work. He would come home from work, dinner was ready, the children were bathed, homework was done. I would put the kids to bed. I used sex as a tool to calm him down. And I thought it was working. But then all of a sudden, from nowhere, something is always wrong. A deposit didn't get registered into the bank account. I made a deposit for him from work, and it didn't show up on the computer that day because it was done after a certain time of day, so it only shows up the next day. And then I would be called names. Are you stupid? Can't you get there at 3 o'clock? Why did you go at 4 o'clock? I was running carpool. Can't you get someone else to do your carpool? Like, are you stupid? Are you disorganized? Name calling and basically taking away any, feelings of worth that I was clinging on to. So at that point, I started saying, you know, this doesn't make sense.
But at no time he hit you.
No, I would think there were times where the anger was so, he was built up, and he would come up to my face and look at me, and I would say, if you touch me, I'm calling the police. And he would just sort of step back. So would have it escalated to physical abuse? I don't know. But he never touched me.
And at that point, it's interesting. Until then, you catered to him, but under threat of violence, you took a stand, and he backed down. Did you realize that?
I didn't really. I mean, I know, looking, you know, hindsight is 20/20. I think I started gaining some confidence at that point, realizing, because
so over the years you've been all this wore away at your confidence. Is that typical, Penny?
Absolutely. What happens with women who are being abused is that their self-esteem is eroded in a very, very subtle way. It's very insidious, it happens very slowly, and one of the huge misconceptions about abuse is that if you're not physically abused, you're not being abused. And that is one of the huge pieces that we at Act to End Violence Against Women are trying to educate women and educate the public about. Abuse has a number of elements. There's verbal abuse, there's psychological abuse, there's emotional abuse that are tied together in certain ways. There's financial abuse, and Rena, has also had experience with financial abuse. There's sexual abuse, and there's spiritual abuse, where a woman is not allowed to practice her faith in the way that she wants to. No woman enters a relationship and the first thing that happens is a man hits her. That isn't the way it happens. It starts with the emotional abuse, the verbal, psychological, to wear down your self-esteem, so you begin to doubt yourself, you begin to doubt, maybe it is my fault, maybe I'm not doing it right. As Rena has said, she tried to do everything perfectly so that she wouldn't trigger him or wouldn't make him angry. When a woman in an abusive situation is walking on eggshells, she is questioning herself, she does not believe that she has the ability to make good decisions because she's been told so many times that she cannot. And the other thing that happens with women in abusive relationships is once they get used to one level of abuse, the abuse escalates. The verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, whatever piece you are experiencing, it escalates. And then you get used to another level of abuse. And as Rena has said, women make excuses, women question themselves, women doubt, women think, okay, everybody else around me seems to have a perfect marriage. Why is mine not very good? Why am I having all these problems? It must be my fault. And they've been told this time and time and time again. So the most well-educated, highly professional women, from that perspective to a woman who didn't have the privilege of higher education, it runs the gamut. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how religious or not religious you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have or you don't have. It doesn't matter what level of education you have. Abuse can happen to any woman. And that's one of the things that people don't really understand as well. They think that abuse happens in families where there's, you know, the fellow in the undershirt sitting on the porch drinking beer. That's the picture that we have.
And it's still the myth that abuse doesn't happen to Jewish women?
Absolutely.
Is it still a myth?
It is a myth.
Well,
it is a total
let's lay
myth.
it to rest. And you're doing a good job. Let's talk about it more when we come back. You were married for 29 years. The situation kept getting worse, escalating. What happened that you turned to Penny and found help?
Well, it was a process of a few years. There was one incident that happened in March the 4th of 2001. And my son was skiing on a race team. He fell on the hill. He went into a complete fit of rage, swearing, yelling. I had been announcing the ski race, and my ex-husband had been away with my other son. And upon his return the next day, he asked me what happened, how my son did in the race, and I told him that he fell, and swearing, yelling, his behavior was just totally unacceptable and inappropriate, and my husband blamed me. He swore at me, he said every single time around, and he proceeded to use wonderful words.
In front of the kids?
No, it wasn't in front of the children.
Was he like this ever in front of the kids?
Yes, he did. There were bursts of anger in front of the kids, but this specific incident, the children were sleeping, and he blamed me. And I realized at that point that it wasn't me being affected anymore. It wasn't my feelings being hurt, but my children were now being subjected to certain behaviors, and they were starting to think that was okay. Then when you're upset or you're annoyed, you swear, you yell, you rant, and at that point I said, I'm saving my children.
I just want to point out that there's wide bodies of research that speak to the influence on children of living in homes where abuse is happening. Even though people think that it's behind closed doors and the kids are sleeping, children know. Children learn, and there's a tremendous, children who witness abuse are affected profoundly. Go ahead.
At that point in time, I decided that we need professional help. And we did go through 5 different therapists, and the reason there were 5 in an 8-year span, it was because every time an issue was brought to an head and I needed some resolution, my ex-husband would say, I'm not coming back here anymore. As soon as the therapist would address specific issues that he didn't want to deal with, then we were on to the next therapist who would understand our situation, or I thought would understand our situation better.
Did Rena do the right thing, turn to therapy?
She did the right thing to turn to therapy. The mistake was that when you are in an abusive relationship, going to therapy as a couple is not productive, because the abuse continues in the therapeutic session, and when the woman gets home, she could be even in more trouble for things that she disclosed at the...
Because they use it as ammunition.
Exactly.
Is that what happened,
Exactly.
Rena?
That's exactly what happened.
The therapist should have identified and said, this is not appropriate. I will see one of you. The other one needs to find a different therapist. They shouldn't even be seeing the same therapist.
Basically, nobody, and I went to some very, who I considered or were recognized as good professionals. But the problem is that for therapy to work, for a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it's like a doctor making a diagnosis. If you don't tell him what your ailment or what you're feeling, how is he supposed to guess? And basically, I didn't recognize it as abuse, and my ex-husband would constantly make excuses. Yeah, but she did this, and yeah, but she said that, and yeah, but the deposit was late, and yeah, but the program wasn't necessary, and yeah, so it was very hard to get anywhere. So I can honestly say that the 5 therapists, although it did enlighten me in certain ways, really did not identify abuse. Penny was the first one.
That's incredible.
Penny was the first person. I read an article in a newspaper that Penny had participated in, and her website and her phone number was there. And I called her up and I said, I need to talk to you. And I told her my story. She said, you're an abuse victim. And I'm like...
You were shocked.
Is this really abuse? And she said, yeah, that's real abuse. So Penny basically, and her organization, was the first person who was able to give me a label to my diagnosis. And it was very helpful because now I understood, if you don't know
what did you do about it? Okay, you knew?
I ended up getting divorced. I ended up having to stand up. I mean, that's a bit of a problem when you get a diagnosis, and that's why sometimes we avoid. Because once they tell you this is your problem, then you have to decide, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to medicate for it? Am I going to do surgery for it? You have to start dealing with it. So sometimes...
And one of the things that happens in these relationships, when a woman does become empowered with the diagnosis or with the decisions that she's making, the abuse escalates because the partner can sense in that woman a strength returning to her. They can identify in that woman that she's not the same as she was. Once she's made some decisions, she's not the same person, and the abuse escalates. And by the way, the abuse does not end when a woman leaves.
What do you mean?
There are many forms of abuse that continue. There are many legal abuses that go on, financial abuse.
Did he do that to you?
I'm living it right now.
Women live through nightmares of legal and financial bullying and abuse. Men hide the financial pieces. In Rena's instance, she didn't know about all the financial, but she really suspected that there was a lot of money being hid, et cetera, et cetera. And so in order to get a settlement that will serve her and her family well, she needed to go after that. Men continue to abuse women through the children. All kinds of things go on. It is a nightmare.
Because when you're over, it's not over. You still have to be in contact.
Exactly.
Our time is up. What's your message out there for women, for people?
Stand up for what you believe in. Reach out. I hope you don't need it, but if you do need it, call Penny. You're worthy of more. You're worthy of being treated well. Be safe and be careful and protect your children.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Penny.
You're welcome.
We'll see you next week. Until then, be a mensch, Doris Epstein.
Thank you.
This is really